we're doing the course online, because of the special circumstances now. And so that makes it a bit different than if you're here at the Abbey. Um, because when you're here at the Abbey, you have the whole experience of being immersed in a Dharma environment. Whereas this weekend, you're still at home and you have everything that happens at home. So try as much as you can, to keep silence, to in the break time, not to get involved in all the usual things you do. Don't open up, the your video games and distract yourself, but really keep your mind in a retreat environment and follow the meditations. There won't be an evening meditation that's guided, but what you can do is do the morning or after the pre-lunch meditation again, or reflect on any of the points that came up during the teachings, because it's really by taking the time to think about these teachings and imagine practicing them in your life with real situations that have happened to you, that doing that is what really transforms your mind and makes things become integrated. So try and do that in the break time. Yeah. Not everything will be clear. Nothing is always clear. Uh, so this is part of the thing of learning the Dharma, is we hear a lot of new ideas that we haven't heard before, and very often they will go against what we believe or what we've been taught to believe. And our instant reaction sometimes could be, no, it's not like that. Like, what do you mean? You're telling me I have to forgive somebody? Never. If you have that attitude, I'm wondering why you signed up for the retreat. But, uh, you know, if you signed up, I think it indicates that maybe underneath you're beginning to doubt that strong, angry response. Okay, so give yourself the space to really think about these things and don't just, back away if your ego feels threatened. Okay, in Buddhism, because, yeah, the I that feels threatened is the one that does not exist in the way it appears. So don't let it run the show, because it isn't real. Yeah. So you learn some new ideas, try them out, put them into practice, try thinking in a different way. And we need to do this repeatedly, but you'll see the change if you do it. Yeah. Because especially, in this retreat, we have the option of holding on to our anger or releasing it. So just think which one is going to make you happy, or holding on to it with a grudge, vowing never to forgive, or, you know, gradually releasing the anger and having a peaceful mind. Okay. So we'll start the session with some recitations that we do to kind of warm up, in the sense of steering our mind in a good direction. And then go into a few minutes of breathing meditation, simply observing your breath, letting it be relaxed, letting it flow naturally without forcing it. Let's do that for a couple of minutes, and it helps the mind settle down. Then let's cultivate our motivation and get in touch with that part in yourself, in your heart, where you really just want to live peacefully with other people. Whereas there's the need, the desire, the wish, simply to not be in conflict and to live peacefully. And to live peacefully with others doesn't mean that they're going to change and do everything we want. To live peacefully, we have to release our judgment and anger and develop acceptance, tolerance, compassion. So to fulfill our deep wish to live peacefully with others entails changing our own mind, not changing others. So we start out with changing our mind in small ways, but it's good to keep in mind the long-term project of totally purifying our mind so that all defilements, all disturbing emotions and wrong views are completely put to rest. They no longer plague us. And to develop all of our good qualities to their fullest extent. And so our long-term goal is to become a fully awakened Buddha. And sharing the Dharma together this weekend is one step in that direction. So let that be our motivation. So I think what we're doing this weekend, cultivating forgiveness, is really going upstream in this country nowadays, because cultivating forgiveness is also involved with apologizing, accepting ourselves, not blaming, abandoning bullying, not dissing people or canceling them. Okay, but really learning to open our heart towards others. So I think what we're doing this weekend is quite really up the stream for, going the opposite way. And although compared to the population of the country, we're only a small number of people doing this, I think it has a strong impact. And I think people, even who aren't attending this course, who know about it, just for them to know that there's people who are trying to tame their minds and forgive and develop a more accepting and harmonious attitude towards others in society. I think for them it's a great inspiration and a relief. So we'll all do our best. As it happens this morning, we It's interesting, a retreat on forgiveness. And we just had news of the death of John Lewis, the U.S. Congressman for over 30 years, who was really an icon of the civil rights movement. You may have seen even the videos ever since he was young. He was born on the son of sharecroppers on a cotton farm in Alabama. Yeah, that already puts your life in a certain direction, doesn't it? And even in his 20s, he was very motivated for civil rights and for working for equality. He participated in the Freedom Riders. He sat in, when they had the people who went to sit at the counters, where it was only supposed to be white people who got served. He was in a waiting room one time, I'm not sure, maybe at a bus station. It was only for white people. He went in. So these kinds of pacifist civil disobedience. He was a very close friend of Martin Luther King. And the videos you may have seen speak about when they crossed the bridge in Selma. I think that was in 1965. And the state troopers and the police were waiting for them. They're just people walking across a bridge. That's all you do, is you walk across the bridge and you're asking for equal rights. And they were faced with troopers and police and so on, and dogs biting them, clubbing them, spraying them with hoses, not garden hoses, but the kinds of water hoses that are meant to knock you down. And John Lewis was in his early 20s then, and the police were clubbing people, and his skull was fractured at that time, so he was quite seriously injured. He went on to become a councilman, I think, in Atlanta, and then a congressman for that district in the U.S. Congress. And you might remember him. I mean, he really stood up in Congress when there was, I think it after the shooting in Parkland, when the Congress, the Democrats wanted to have a discussion about weapons and guns, and the Republicans exited and didn't participate. And he stayed in there with the other Democrats and said, we're going to continue speaking, because this is an important issue that affects the country. So they were there all night and into the next day, continuing to speak about the need for gun control. Yeah. So everything he did was totally nonviolent, but he was often met with violence. So, as a beginning for our forgiveness retreat, I wanted to read to you one short story, just a paragraph about him, and how, because it's a story about forgiveness. So one of the things that he said to his students is, when you see something that is not right, not fair, not just, you have a moral obligation to say, to do something and to say something. Okay, and Dr. King inspired us to do just that. So that was how he lived his life, And like I said, he was often met with physical violence and certainly verbal violence and people trashing him, verbally in response to what he was doing. But he also believed in forgiveness. Okay, so he once talked about an incident when, as a young man, he was beaten bloody by members of the Ku Klux Klan after attempting to end a white waiting room, probably at a bus station. Okay, so that was probably in the 60s, yeah. And many years later, in February of 2009, one of the men who had beaten him came to Lewis's office on Capitol Hill. So this man was in his 70s. He came with his son, who was in his 40s. And he said, Mr. Lewis, I am one of the people who beat you and your seatmate on a bus. Can you imagine this? All those years later, this old man coming with his son, so admitting this in the presence of his son and saying, I did that. And the man said, I was in the KKK at that time, and now I want to apologize. Will you accept my apology? So Lewis accepted his apology, and afterwards the three of them were hugging, and they all were sobbing. So that's the power of forgiveness. Yeah, that elderly man was able to, he obviously had regret for what he did for like 40 years, more than 40 years, but he had the courage to go and apologize, and the relief that he felt. And I would say probably too, the relief at showing the example to his son that he was a human being with integrity. And from Lewis's side, probably he didn't need the apology, yeah. But he is certainly open to it and forgave, and the three of them reconciled in a very beautiful way. So Lewis said, it is the power in the way of peace, the way of love. We must never, ever hate. The way of love is a better way. Okay, now you'll see in how he lived like that and what he said, that you can live the way of love, you can live the way of forgiveness, but it doesn't mean that you become a doormat. It doesn't mean that you say yes to whatever somebody else wants when whatever they want is damaging and unfair and unjust. So he was able to stand up morally for what he believed in, and at the same time, accept that not everybody's going to agree and some people are going to harm him, but he's not going to hold rancor in response. So he had that very firm decision in his mind, yeah, that holding antipathy, holding a grudge is not the way to go. Okay, so you see, he stood up for things. He wasn't a doormat. People did not walk all over this guy. But he didn't trash them, bully them, criticize them, hate them, try and retaliate, and cause them harm in return. Okay, so this is what we're getting at. When we talk about forgiveness, we have to understand what forgiveness is and also what it isn't. Okay, so it isn't being passive and saying, oh, whatever you do to me is okay, I forgive you. Yeah. You beat me up. You can once, you can beat me up again. You can harm other people. I forgive you. I mean, the example of John Lewis's life is not that. Yeah. Allowing people to do harmful actions and create horrible negative karma in doing so is not compassion. Okay. So it's fine to intercede and do what you can to stop harm, but you do it without anger and rancor and spite. Yeah. So that's a tall order in a culture where we have been taught ever since we were little kids to retaliate if somebody harms us. For example, yeah, do you remember when you played in the sandbox with other little kids when you were maybe 2 or 3 years old and somebody threw sand in your eyes? Yeah. And what did your parents say? And when you were in kindergarten and first grade and some other kid snatched the ball from you or slugged you when you hadn't done anything, what did your parents say? Yeah. Not all parents said the same thing, but a number of them said, they threw sand at you, throw sand back. Yeah, they threw rocks at you, throw rocks back. They bullied you, don't back down, go and shove them, slug them. Yeah, don't let them bully you, retaliate with the same thing they did to you. Okay, so a number of kids, that's what they learn, from their very little age. Yeah. And I think especially for men, this is difficult because this whole idea of what is now called toxic masculinity by some people. By some people, it's not toxic, it's masculinity. You're supposed to stand up and punch somebody, and that's the sign of being a man. Actually, I've always wondered about that. It's never impressed me as a good quality. Yeah. So, and in our culture, and especially now, we so often see that example from the highest levels of government. When somebody does something you don't like or even says something you don't like, you retaliate. Yeah, you don't forgive them. You don't cultivate understanding. You don't try and dialogue. You retaliate. And then often the other person holds a grudge. Somebody harms you, so you harm them and you hold a grudge against them. Yeah. And then, of course, they don't like being harmed, so then they harm you back and they hold a grudge against you. And it just keeps going. And you have a Twitter war, or you have worse, a trade war, or even worse, you have bomb strikes where innocent people get killed. Okay, so it's very important at the beginning to realize we can stand up for things, but without anger and with an attitude that is willing to reconcile. Yeah. Because one of the jams we get into when we're angry is uh, making a vow to never forgive the other person. So somebody harmed me, somebody ratted on me, somebody did whatever it was. Yeah. And we take a vow. I will never forgive them for what they did. Never. Okay. And what's interesting with those people is their marriage vows, they will renegotiate when it's convenient and they want to have an affair. Um, whatever precepts they may have taken not to lie, they'll renegotiate when there's some benefit for themselves. But the vow never to speak to somebody again as long as I live, yeah, we don't break that vow. Really rather stupid, isn't it, when you think about it? Okay, so there's going to be a lot of stories this weekend, okay? So let me start in talking about the disadvantages of not forgiving, okay, and holding on to anger. So I come from a family, on my mother's side of the family, that are experts in taking the vow of not to speak to a relative that they love dearly ever again. That sounds weird, doesn't it? You love somebody very much, and then you vow never to speak to them again because they did something that hurt you. And what's very interesting in how these situations evolve is that often we forget what the initial hurt was. We forget what the initial situation was. But what we remember is they did something we can't remember, but we felt hurt. We felt offended. We felt attacked. So we remember how we feel, even though the initial situation we can't remember. Yeah. And then we make that vow never to speak to them again. So already from the beginning, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Yeah, we forget what they did. So this is the history in my family. Okay. So mind you, my family's a family of immigrants. My grandmother's generation all came here. I really wonder what would happen if they had been in this country longer and we had more family history, because I don't know anything about, great grandparents and before that. So who knows what kind of grudges happened in the family, back then. I only know the grudges that started with my grandparents. Yeah, but I really wonder, because this is the kind of thing that is passed down in families, the kind of behavior and way of thinking that kids learn from observing their parents. Yeah. So we do have, the seed of anger inside of us, and that does come up. But this, determination that comes with thought of never to speak to somebody again, that's something we learn in this life. And who do we learn it from? The examples of the adults around us. So either what we see on TV or in our own family. Okay? So that's why I say, who knows what happened before they came to this country. So they had, on my mother's side, they had a summer property by Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. And there were 4 units. They were old buildings, but everybody went there in the summer for vacation. So, my mother and her siblings and so on, they occupied 2 of the buildings, 2 of the units. And the other 2, I was told, especially the people on the upper floor of the other one, I was never to speak to them. Okay, so I'm a little kid, you know. So this is something happened, I have no idea what, happened at the level of my grandmother's generation, whereby her brothers and sisters who owned those upper two limits, and my grandmother, and I don't know who else was on her side, but anyway, they never spoke to each other. So they were brothers and sisters. Who knows what happened? They didn't speak to each other. And they taught their children, my parents' generation, that they shouldn't speak to their aunts and uncles. And then I was the next generation, and I was taught not to speak to those people too. Okay, so that's my grandparents' generation. And to this day, I mean, I remember hearing names of aunts and uncles, but I can't remember who was the good guys and who were the bad guys. And I just know I have a whole bunch of relatives there that I have no idea who they are or what their names are, but I was never to speak to them. Anyway, then, so what happened after time, I think, is my parents' generation, they bought out the other people in the other units. So now they had all of them. So something happened amongst my mother and my aunt and my two uncles. Okay, so her siblings. Again, I don't really know what happened. I remember some story, but the story doesn't make sense to me of why you should hate somebody forever. But so I have really no idea what happened. But again, among the next generation down, my parents' generation, my mom and her sister, well, one brother died young, but my mom and her sister did not speak to their other brother. Now, I remember this other brother, he was my uncle, and when I was little, they all talked together, and we stayed at their house, and, I know my cousins, and we were all good friends, and the family was good, and then something happened, and then they didn't speak to each other. Okay, so again, I don't know exactly what's going on. So, I always remember thinking, my generation, we will never do this. We will be more mature than our grandparents and our parents. Well, come my generation, yeah. So in the siblings of one of those parents, I don't know, amongst them, there were 5 kids, but not all of them talked to the other ones. And I don't even know who among them talked to who and who doesn't talk to who. Okay. And, it just went from one generation to the next generation because you copy what your parents do. Yeah. And especially if parents criticize their siblings in the presence of their children, they're actually telling their children, when you grow up, you can criticize each other and hate each other. They're setting the example for that. So you can see it started with my grandparents' generation, went to my parents' generation, went to my generation. Yeah, I don't know all the next generation because they live in another part of the country, and I'm a Buddhist nun, so they accept me, but we're not real close. Okay, but you can only imagine in my family when there is a family event. Yeah, somebody gets married, there's a bar mitzvah, there's a funeral, something. Trying to draw up a seating table for where people are going to sit for the celebration dinner is impossible, because who do you put together at the same table? Because that one doesn't speak to this one, but speaks to that one, but this one doesn't speak to that one. And then this one over here speaks to all of them except to the one over there. And then it's, it's like craziness. And these are people who supposedly love each other, who are mature adults trying to raise their children with good ethics. Yeah? So, one of the points I want to point out here is when we don't forgive, it's not only harming us and whoever else the other person in the situation was involved in, it harms the next generation, because they learn by observing. And you look, when Yugoslavia fell apart in the 90s, and you had all these people, these different ethnic groups who used to be part of one country, who are now murdering each other, the Serbs and the Macedonians and the Croats, and I don't know who was on whose side, because I was out of the country during all of this when this happened. But why do they hate each other? Because 300 years ago, your ancestors did this to my ancestors. Yeah. So none of us were alive. We were all in a few previous lives ago. But because your ancestors, who are no longer alive, harmed my ancestors, who are no longer alive, I have the duty to, what's the word? What? Not what? It's like, yeah, avenge. To avenge their honor, and attack you and hate you. Okay. Is that stupidity? Not even animals do that. Yeah. Animals will fight when there's immediate danger or they're hungry. That's it. Human beings fight over honor. Okay. Again, the McCoys and the Hatfields. Okay. I have no idea what they fought over. Does anybody remember? But, for generations, these families, these clans were killing each other. So it's totally amazing that this happens. It also happens on national levels and on group levels, where something happened, like in Yugoslavia 300 years ago, so we have to avenge the people now. Okay? Countries go to war. The soldiers are taught how to hate, and that hate, and they are taught that they are, again, avenging the honor and dignity and standing up for their own country. And they're killing other people who are total strangers. Yeah. If on the streets of this country you go and kill a total stranger, you get put in prison. Okay? Even you kill somebody you know, you get put in prison. In war, it's legitimate. Yeah? And then so many of the people come home from war carrying anger towards the enemy, but often carrying anger towards their own government that lied to them about the conflict. So what we have, what you look at, you see dependent arising here, and how when there's some anger that doesn't get resolved when people are not forgiven, then it just spreads and it contaminates more people and it contaminates future generations. Okay? So just, think about it. Maybe your family has some dynamics that are like my family. I don't know. But think about how you were brought up and what you observed as a child. And if you're a parent, think about what example you are setting for your own kids if you hold grudges against your relatives, yeah, against siblings, or if as a parent you criticize your own parents in the presence of your children, yeah, and you hate your own parents and say it was a toxic, family, and you say all of that in front of your own kids, even when they're very little, what are you teaching your kids? You're teaching your kids when they grow up to look at their parents and criticize their parents and to say that it was toxic and that their parents harmed them. Yeah. But as a parent, you want your kids to be harmonious and you want your kids to love you when they're grown. So if you want that, show that example yourself and learn to forgive the other family members. Yeah. So really, really think about this. It's important. Yeah. The thing that happened in my family was so severe. Again, I don't even know why my mother and my aunt decided not to speak to their brother. But the cousins, his children and my aunt, my kids, they talked to each other. So when my uncle was dying, his son called, either it was my brother or another cousin, and then my brother got word of it, and said, my dad's dying. If your mothers want to speak to them, this is the chance. So I heard about this after it happened. If I had known about it before, I would have done something. But both sisters said, no, we don't want to speak to him. He's dying. Why don't you want to speak to him? He's your brother, Relieve your own heart of that hatred. So this is what happens when the grasping at the I is very strong. Yeah, the self-grasping ignorance is strong, and the self-centeredness is strong. This is what happens. So as a child, fortunately, when I saw this, I said, I am not going to do this. Yeah. A situation happened later where I could have done it, and I decided not to. Yeah, because it's stupid. It's totally stupid. So again, what forgiveness isn't. Yeah, it's not about becoming a doormat. It's not about saying what people did is okay. Yeah. It's definitely not about saying what people did is okay. Because sometimes people do harmful things and they have to be held accountable for those harmful things. Okay? So forgiveness does not mean that you don't hold people accountable. Okay? Forgiveness is also, not about pretending it didn't happen. They say forgive and forget. I don't think the forget part is so wise, because if somebody did something that broke trust, or that was really harmful to somebody else, we need to remember that for a few reasons. First of all, we remember it to make sure that we never do that to somebody else. We use it as an example for what I will never do. Yeah. Second of all, because it broke trust, it takes time for trust to be reestablished. Yeah. So we don't just say, I forgot about it. Yeah. We forgive, we don't hold anger, but we remember that the person did that. And then, we are careful around the person until the trust is reestablished. Okay, when the trust is reestablished, then if you want to forget about it, that's okay. But again, we have to remember it to make sure we don't do it. In the case of things happening like that between countries, definitely we should not forget. Yeah, the Holocaust happened. It should not be forgotten. Yeah, the Japanese occupation of East Asia during the Second World War happened. It was brutal. It should not be forgotten. Yeah, so that we don't do the same thing again. Yeah. But you can see here how important forgiveness is. I was reading something. So somebody was talking about in the Second World War, the Germans did atrocious things. The Japanese did atrocious things. Yeah. But now the Germany is really, really prospering. And Japan prospered, but it's held back too. And it's had a bunch of natural disasters and calamities and things like that. And so somebody was saying, in the case of Germany after the war, they really owned what they did. Yeah. And because the Germans owned it, the world was able to forgive. Yeah. And I don't think people hold any grudges towards Germany now. And Venerable Jampa has taught us a lot about what they did to own what happened, and how even the school children, when she was a little kid, you always went to concentration camps. You were shown and told, what happened. And there was definitely a feeling of regret in the country, and asking for forgiveness for what happened during the Nazi occupation. Whereas in the case of the Japanese, they haven't owned everything that happened during the war, especially the issues of the war. Do you call them war brides? Huh? Comfort women. Thank you. That's the word I was looking for, the comfort women. So women during the occupation of all of East Asia, the Japanese soldiers wanted prostitutes. So, of course, you don't call them prostitutes. That's not nice. They're called comfort women. But the way they got their comfort women was they kidnapped them. And so young women were kidnapped from their family and taken to the bases where the Japanese soldiers were. This happened in Indonesia. It happened in Korea. Yeah, it's still a big issue now between Korea and Japan, because Japan will not acknowledge this to the Koreans. And there are women still alive who are very elderly now, who were forced to become comfort women for the Japanese soldiers. and there's proof of it, but no apology, no acknowledgement of what happened. Okay. The Japanese were incredibly brutal in China. I mean, horrible, horrible, lining the massacre of Nanjing, I think it was. They just lined people up, on the edge of a grave and went and shot them in the back of their head, just down the row, so they just would fall into the grave. And this is like around 1938, 39, I can't remember exactly. But, I don't know how much they've acknowledged that. Okay. So this kind of thing happens on a personal level. It happens on a group level, on an international level. But you can see what happens if things are not acknowledged and apologies made, and if forgiveness is not given. Yeah. What forgiveness also is not about is waiting for an apology. So this is one of our favorite things that we do that leads us to hold on to our anger, is we say they have to apologize first. Yeah, they have to own it before I can forgive them. So I'm going to wait for an apology. Now, very often, the way conflicts arise between human beings is through things being misinterpreted. They're not somebody not really meaning any harm, but doing something that the other person interprets as offensive. Okay? And so the person who interprets this as offensive, the person who interprets it as aggressive, holds a grudge. But the person who did it may not even know that they did something that hurt somebody else so badly. Okay. Some conflicts, somebody very deliberately went to hurt somebody else, and the other person knows it. Okay. So conflicts are different, Some, there's a definite, wish to harm, and the other person knows there's a wish to harm. In others, somebody does something that was rude or inconsiderate or thoughtless or negative, but there wasn't a harmful intention, but the other people interpret it that way. In either situation, doesn't matter, in either situation, if we were the person who harmed or who felt harmed, if we wait for the other party to apologize, we are going to have a long wait, probably. And we're going to be quite miserable towards it because we've taken this vow to hate that person. They said this to me, they did that to me, they did this to somebody I love. Yeah, they did this to my group of people. They said that to my group of people. So I hate them forever because they are a horrible, disgusting human being who doesn't even deserve to be alive. Okay? There's so much here to pull out, and we only have 2 days, but there's a lot of points to tease out here. Anyway, let's tease out one. My thing, I am not going to forgive them because look at what they did. They are so horrible. What they did is so harmful. They need to apologize first, and then I will consider forgiving them. Okay? So you live your life with that kind of hatred, anger, rancor inside. The other person is out living their life, doing what they're doing. Who's suffering when we hold a grudge? Who's the person who's suffering? The other person? No. We are suffering. When we hold a grudge, we are the chief victim of the grudge holding. We are the one who suffers the most. So I often say that holding grudges is the best way to torture yourself. Yeah? The other person may or may not know you're mad, but anyway, they're off doing it. We're sitting there. I hate them. They need to apologize. What can I do to get my revenge? Yeah, I've got to give them a taste of their own medicine. These horrible, disgusting people. Okay. So we're the one who suffers by holding hatred. Yeah. Well, I mean, who's happy when you're angry? Anybody happy when they're angry? When you hate somebody, are you beaming with joy? You're so happy to hate somebody. Yeah. When we hold on to anger and hatred and resentment, we're the one who's suffering. It's so excellent for self-torture. And that's what happens when we say they need to apologize first. So they not only need to just say, I'm sorry. We create in our mind the scene in which they say are sorry. We need this kind of apology. So I am sitting there. There he is, the guy who hurt me, crawling on all fours, crawling up the aisle towards me, beating his breast, saying, mea culpa, I'm so sorry. What did I do to you? I hurt you so much. And he has so much regret in his heart, and he's so sincere, and he hates himself for what he did to me, and he realizes how he betrayed my trust, how awful he was, and he's just so sobbing with regret, begging me for forgiveness as he crawls up the aisle on all fours. And he gets up here and asks for my forgiveness. And mind you, I've hated him for decades. And I've been waiting for forgiveness, for an apology. But he gets up here to apologize. Well, I'm glad you finally realized how much you hurt me, you despicable human being. Now, get out of here. Yeah, that's how we accept the apology. Actually, we don't accept the apology, do we? Yeah. We rub it in more. Look what you did, you horrible person. I'm going to rub it in more so that you feel more regret. Yeah, it's a pitiful situation, isn't it? But we want our revenge. We're not going to let them off the hook. Meaning, we're not going to let ourselves be happy. We are going to keep ourselves in a state of anger and hatred, even though they apologized. Or when they come up to apologize, we might go, well, I'll think about it. Incredible what we human beings do. I mean, there's no better way to make yourself miserable, is there? Yeah. So that's not what we've got to do. Forget about the other person apologizing. Yeah. Now, apologizing and forgiving are related, and we will talk about apologizing as the time goes on. Okay. But the point here is we can forgive without the apology. The only thing necessary for us to forgive is to release our anger. So that's the meaning of forgiveness. Like I said, it's not forgive and forget. It's not, they didn't do anything wrong. Don't hold them accountable, you know. It's not taking the blame on ourselves. Oh, you're apologizing, but it was really all my fault. Yeah, it's not that. Yeah, it's just deciding that we are tired of hurting inside. Yeah, that holding on to hatred, anger, spite, revenge is too painful. Doesn't matter if they apologize or not. Forgiving is what we need to do to release all of that energy. Because think about how much energy we put into holding a grudge. And that energy could be put into being incredibly creative, to doing something fun, to benefiting others, to, there's so many things we can do with our energy in a good way, but we keep it all knotted up like this. Okay? Because I need them to apologize. And until they apologize, I'm not going to forget. Okay? So, yeah, it just means letting go of the anger. And if we say, I can't forgive because they need to apologize first, then we are giving our power away. Then we are making ourselves into a victim. They're not making us into a victim. We're saying, I'm powerless. I can't forgive. They have to do something first. So, just saying, I'm tired of hating. I remember somebody, I have many different personal stories to tell about this, but one person that I was holding a grudge against, for some years. And at some point, the grudge wasn't a really intense one. It wasn't, I'm never going to speak to this person again kind of grudge. It was, they did something nasty kind of grudge. And at a certain point, I just decided, they were never going to apologize. Never. I know the person well. Never were they going to apologize. So I just said, I'm going to love them. That's all. That's my job, is I'm just going to love them. Yeah, and I'm going to love them with all their faults and with all the nasty thing they did to me. But there's no purpose in holding a grudge. So I'm just going to love them. That's all. So I've been much happier since then. Yeah? And then it's been interesting Because when I first started practicing the Dharma, of course, there were these really big resentments, that it took me a long time to unpack and forgive. But now I'm beginning to notice smaller resentments. Just, somebody was a little discourteous to me. Yeah. And how, we're at a conference and somebody comes up, I'm talking with somebody, and they come up and start talking to the other person and just ignore me. This kind of thing happens a lot, doesn't it? I don't think the other person would even remember the situation. I don't think they felt any hostility at all. But I remember. And so noticing these small kinds of things in which I am holding a grudge against somebody for something they did that took about 15 seconds out of their whole lifetime. And that's the only action they ever did. That's the whole value of their entire life. To the point where if somebody else praises them, my blood curdles, because I don't want them to have any praise, although they're a good person and they've done a lot and they've contributed a lot. And, when I look, there's nothing for me to fault in that person. But, at that conference, they just ignored me. And so noticing those kinds of things, small things, and it's like, stupid, I just need to drop that. And then again, love that person, really see all the good things that they've done in their life and appreciate that, because they're working for the same kind of things I'm working for in life. Okay. So I saw one of those. Then I saw another one, also during a conference. Somebody not recognizing who I was. Yeah, so insulting. And somebody else was there who witnessed it, and agreed with me that that person was too much. You want to hear the situation? No, I shouldn't tell you the situation. Anyway. Yeah. It was a situation in which, you're fully competent, but because you're a woman, they completely look over you and point to somebody else. So it was that kind of situation. So there was another woman there. She was like looking at this going, what's this guy doing? But it happens all the time, doesn't it? Yeah. So again, I noticed that. Again, something, this one maybe was a minute out of his life. The first guy was really only 15 seconds. This one was a minute. But again, it's like, what am I holding on to this for? The person has already passed away. They were a good human being. They did many, many good things. Okay, he's in a field where misogyny reigns. I expect him to not be misogynist. So what do I get out of holding a grudge against him? Nothing. What do I get out of, my blood curdling when somebody praises something that he did well, which I think he also did well, So being able to notice these smaller and smaller things where we just block people out. Yeah. And the thing about blocking people out, whether it's a big grudge or a small grudge, is we're going to wind up being pretty lonely. Because we start out coming into this world and everybody is a stranger. And we're a baby, so they're going to be friends because people love adorable babies. And gradually, people do small things or big things that I don't like. And I hold a grudge. And, they're all in the room together. I kick them out of the room being the people that I accept, that I think are good, that I want to be around. Yeah. So first grade, somebody does this, kick them out. Second grade, kick that one out. Third one, kick that one out. And then as an adult, boy, then we really start kicking people out. Yeah. And then pretty soon, how many people are there left that you feel comfortable with? You're so critical and so judgmental that you've kicked everybody out and you're not going to have any friends and you're going to be pretty lonely. Yeah. And it's not because everybody else in the world is a rotten human being. Yeah. It's because we delight in making ourselves a victim by holding on to a grudge. Yeah. So I think, I'm spending time this first session all about the disadvantages of grudge holding, because unless we really see this clearly, we won't understand the benefits of giving up holding that kind of grudge, because once our self-grasping and our self-centeredness get involved in it, we really cling on to this. This is my identity. Okay, my identity, the person who is the victim of what they did to me. Okay, now's my Peter Armetta story. Okay, so 7th grade, Mr. Reese's class. Yeah, see, I remember it. And I even remember what the classroom looked like, where I was sitting, the teacher looked like, Don't ask me to remember something that happened yesterday. But this, I remember very clearly. So it was Monday morning, and it was current events. Remember current events on Monday morning? Okay. So something was, I was, so 7th grade, that meant I was 12. Okay, 12. Yeah. And something was going on in the Middle East, between the Palestinians and the Israelis, and, going on and going on and going on. And so we're talking about this in class. And then, I'm from a Jewish background. And then Peter Armetta says, why don't all you people go back to where you came from? You don't belong here. So I had been taught, as a nice Jewish girl, that whenever you faced anti-Semitism, you were supposed to be angry and you were supposed to be hurt. So this was what I had learned, because for 4,000 years they've been persecuting us. Yeah. So what do you want? You have to be angry and hurt after 4,000 years, because if they persecuted my ancestors way back then, then I better hate the people now, even though it's not the same people who persecuted my ancestors, and I wasn't even alive then. Anyway, so Peter Armetta said this. So I'm like, and I break down sobbing. I run out of the class. I go to the girls' bathroom, and I sob and sob and sob. So this was morning class. I stayed in that bathroom most of the day crying. Okay, very productive. Yeah. And I vowed at that time I was never going to speak to Peter Armetta again as long as I live. Now, the thing is, Peter and Armetta and I were in the same class in 7th grade, in 8th grade, and all through high school. Okay? So here I was in the same class, always, with this kid who I vowed never to speak to again as long as I lived. Yeah. We even got on some special program together, you know? And I look at that now and it's like, stupid, you know? And I would really, along with Rosie Knox, I would really like to meet Peter Armetta one day and apologize to these people. Yeah. Now, does Peter Armetta remember that incident? Does he feel that he owes me an apology? Is he anti-Semitic nowadays? I have no idea, and it doesn't even matter. Because the problem is in me. The problem is in me if I hold a grudge against somebody else. Okay? So, I don't know, maybe he'll listen to one of my talks and contact me, and then I can apologize. And maybe he'll apologize, and maybe no, he won't. I don't really care. Yeah? So, yeah. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes for questions and comments. Yeah.
Could you explain the mechanism of behind the anger, the hurt that's so overwhelming that you just keep sobbing? There's is it the because of the self-grasping ignorance and the self-centered thought that fuels that? Because sometimes it's overwhelming, it just keeps coming up. Is that also related to karma, or is it just based on this life's perceived? Yeah, so I just trying to understand how it sustains itself.
Right. Okay. What's the fuel? What's the fuel that sustains that fire? So there's the self-grasping ignorance that says there is a real me. I am a real person. Yeah. And then we create our whole identity, I am this, 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 this. So it might be our nationality, our race, our religion, our socioeconomic group, our gender, whatever it is. We create an idea of who I am. And people should treat me according to who I think I am. And most of us think that we're pretty good people. Yeah? And most of us think that we deserve respect and other people should respect us and treat us well. So then, the self-centeredness comes in, because that's the one that creates this whole thing of how other people should treat me. Yeah. And then, so we have our rules of the universe of how people should treat me according to who I think I am. And then other people in the world who don't even know what our rules of the universe are break them. And we're infuriated, and especially if it's hitting on something that is a real tender point for us. If it's an identity that we really hold on to tightly, then you get this uncontrollable sobbing. If it's an emotional need, that we feel very, very much. We need love, or we need support, we need understanding at that very moment. And then somebody attacks instead of giving us, the understanding and respect and just plain old human kindness that we needed at that moment. Then sometimes we take it in so deeply that we feel betrayed by the whole world. Yeah. So it becomes like a scene that we've created, except we haven't consciously created it. It's been created out of our self-grasping ignorance. It's been created out of our emotional neediness. It's been created out of our rules of the universe and our self-centeredness. And then, somebody, even, whatever they do, it becomes devastating to the 10th degree. And we're just overcome by sorrow. Yeah. And then all sorts of other things get tied into that. There's, because each situation is very different. Sometimes we feel hurt. Sometimes we feel self-hatred afterwards. Somebody's mad at me because I disappointed them, like a parent or an authority figure or a teacher or somebody, and they're mad at us for something, and then we blame ourselves. I disappointed them. What's wrong with me? And then we, get overwhelmed emotionally. Or sometimes it's, I was just doing some small thing and they totally misinterpreted it, and we feel misunderstood. Yeah. And then, of course, when we feel misunderstood, it's like, well, we all know what that feels like, doesn't it? I'm all alone in the universe. I have no support. Nobody's on my side. I'm sitting there, open to all the whims of the universe and all this hostility and with no protection. So that kind of thinking is going on in our mind, but we don't realize it all because a lot of it is very habitual. Maybe we had that kind of habitual way of thinking in previous lives. So it just comes very natural now. Or it could be that this is what we've observed in the people around us, or it could be what our parents and teachers taught us, or what we learned by watching TV. Yeah. And then it's just, yeah, then we know what happens. We support the tissue company and keep it in business. Yeah, or we spew anger. Yeah. So it could be the sobbing out of sorrow. It could be we sob, and look what I did. I sobbed in the bathroom and then I spewed anger, so we do that. And then I'm going to get even and I'm never going to trust people again because they're not trustworthy, and, all this kind of stuff. So it takes a lot of unpacking, because there's so many different threads in this. Yeah. So it takes a lot of unpacking. Okay. Yeah. This will be the last question because we have
I just want to add something to that because I'm working on that and I find that very, very helpful. Is really the acceptance of karma that's coming towards me, actually. Yeah. Whatever I experience in life has some relationship to what I have done. Maybe not in this life, but in previous lives. So accepting to some extent, it's not accepting that the other person has done harm or something. There may be harm involved that's not justified, but still I experience that and to look into that. And that may not be easy, and I may fight against it because it's so unjust as what I experienced. And but yeah, if I really take it in, then that can have a real transformation.
Yeah, that's very true. And that's a point we're going to come back to.